attorney. I've been an attorney here in the Tampa area for about over 25 years. Been plenty of closings, and I worked with a lot of people in this room, so it's very exciting to see everyone. And I look forward to answering your questions.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kunal Sechbal, Sechbal Law Firm. We're here in Tampa. I've been practicing attorney for going on 16 years, and I'm a business and real estate attorney and handled, you name, hundreds and hundreds of closings.
George Pappas, I'm an attorney over in Clearwater, Florida. Handled pretty much transactions throughout the state for many of the brokers in the room, as well as other BVF affiliates in other regions. Do title work as well, so we handle quite a few business transactions. Been practicing for 26 years, and thank you for the invitation to be here.
We're delighted to have you. Okay, why don't we be handing this back and forth here. Well, I'll do that. I'll read the questions off as we go. Is this a backup? Do they work together? Oh, they do work together. All right, so we requested from you all a list of questions. Some are similar type of stuff, and we're going to go till about 45 minutes. Some of these guys are going to be worn out, and we can't afford the expensive bills. Actually, they're volunteering their time here today. So we're going to go through and do what we can to answer the questions, and maybe you guys feel free to do what you want. Let's do the first thing. What are the top 3 things that business brokers can do to improve the process of submitting purchase agreements? And this was generated, the little attorneys even gave a little feedback. Hey, how can we do it? Because if we do them right, we can do better. But anyway, go.
Well, and it's funny because we were all talking about it before, and I think we're all going to be in consensus with it. I think the easiest thing to do is make sure you have the BVF contract, and to make sure it's filled out correctly. All the boxes are checked, all the blanks are filled in, and with the correct parties. A lot of times, you know, I think it's a little bit of due diligence on your side to make sure you have the correct parties on the contract filled out correctly, and that saves us a lot of time going back, trying to do amendments, which only creates, you know, work for me, work for you guys, where you have to go ahead and send out emails, do the amendment, send it out, get it signed. Now, we could fix lots of stuff with amendments and addendums, but to make the process go more smoothly, you know, the contract is really, really important to be completed correctly, right up front, and that'll save a lot of headache down the road.
Yeah, I can just echo what Joe just said. You'll be amazed how many times we get contracts that have glaring errors in it, blanks that obviously should have been completed. I remember not long ago I got a contract that was only signed by one party. So I have to send it back, so can you please send me a fully executed contract? Simple things. All it takes is a little bit of time, due diligence like Joe said, make sure everything's completed correctly, right names, right entities. You'll be, you know, surprised how many times we get different party names from what actually is being sold. It's basic stuff, just checking due diligence, making sure that it's all correct.
And it's a little bit more of kind of know who you're dealing with, because we run, most of the time you guys send in contracts, they're in the name of the individual buyer, they haven't formed their companies. They're late in getting things filed. The state's been late in getting things processed. We're having to rush entities. We're having to do the amendments. We're having to do the addenda to get the names changed, get all the parties changed. Knowing who the signers that are going to be available. A lot of times we get last minute changes that not all the parties are available at closing. You know, we're using a lot more DocuSign, electronic form of signatures. That's been really great, and it's been a godsend in saving everyone time. But we still need to get the proper parties on, you know, the non-compete agreements. The BVF form has the contract that says who's supposed to join in the non-compete agreement. Well, we get possibly someone who's not even a signer to the contract. We have to then snuff out who the owners are, who the officers are, who need to be parties to the agreement. If they're not on that contract, then for a long time I was using incumbency forms. I don't know what you guys are using. But one of the suggestions is what could be included in the contract. When you're getting your listing agreements, get a list of who those parties are going to be signers to the non-compete, so we know and have the information and make sure they're going to be available. If they're going to designate one signer, officer, one party to sign off on a document that we know, because it'll help streamline, getting documents circulated, getting them prepared, and getting them out to you guys for review.
Yeah, we need to know who all the sellers are, or the principals of the sellers, because they're gonna have to eventually sign a non-compete, and we end up doing resolutions, notices that say all the sellers agree to the sale. So we gotta kind of know that information. So if you guys know it up front, because usually the, part of the listing, that's helpful for us to know. And, and if you don't know, you have to find out who they are.
After that, often people like yourself, maybe just go on SellABiz and look to see who the company is. That's not always the case of who the actual parties of the company are. Ask for their operating agreement, confirm who it is, who the members are, if it's an LLC, or who owns different shares of the corporation, because just because someone is named on SellABiz doesn't mean they're the only party of the company.
And also matters for your listing agreements, because if you don't have the proper signers on the listing agreement, and you're gonna sue the company for, if they default, and you're gonna sue for commission, and they weren't properly signed, they didn't have, it was a bulk sale of the business, you may not have an enforceable listing agreement as well.
Yeah. I just had a little old lady sign up with me and her business was so propane, so I looked it up, and her husband was still in charge, they hadn't finished the probate, so it's like, you never know, so do your research, and you might save yourself a lot of time as well as a lot of headache.
If I can add one more thing?
Yeah,
Actually, two things, actually. The time frames that I've been running into a lot of problems with, you get pressure from your buyers, wanting to run due diligence all the way up to closing. I don't know about you guys, but I hate that. Because, long due diligence time periods are no good, because my practice has been, I usually try and get an initial review of lien issues and searches done that I do internally, so I can get that back in your hands so we can resolve any lien problems or any payoffs or unknown items that might come up to frustrate closing. And I try and review those and refresh those before closing. So the problem is when the due diligence time runs in, the day of or the day before closing, I don't like.
We don't have time, right?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time to do it. I try and get my docs done beforehand, but obviously, we don't get paid unless you guys close. I don't bill unless that, so that's my practice. But, it's frustrating when we have the deals blown up because, we don't have time between due diligence and we're spinning our wheels, doing a lot of searches. Sometimes we'll buy the searches from some of the search companies that will do more formal lien searches. And we're out spending money on those things, and it gets disappointing when the deals blow up because we're spending money on that as well, trying to prepare. Also, the things that I've seen blowing up a lot are the leases. That a lot of things are contingent on leases. I've seen a lot of contracts come back in where you've got your standard lease, check the box in the lease in the BBF contract, and then most cases, buyers are usually trying to put in, we want to negotiate or renegotiate the lease, and the problem that I've seen is that when you're rewriting that it's subject to the buyer getting an acceptable lease, and it's written into the additional terms, that actually is a condition proceeding to closing that runs up to closing. It pulls it outside of the term that's pre-written into the contract. So that gives us a condition that runs up to closing. And how many times have you guys gotten a call that said, hey, we didn't get the lease, it's the day before closing, we're not closing. And it blows up the deal. You don't like spinning your wheels, and trying to get ahead of that problem. Those issues when you're writing those provisions in, add in the terms if you're going to put in subject to getting an acceptable lease provision or lease acceptance or new lease provision. Make sure that you have that also added with some time prior to closing, so it's not going to be dropped in everyone's lap just before the day of closing or the day of closing.
And the only other thing I would add that's kind of important, and it's very rare, but I've seen it happen where I get a contract, there's no deposit. And I don't think that's a good idea. One, it doesn't hold the buyer to much of anything without a deposit. And to be quite honest, I don't think it's good for you guys, because some of that might be recourse, depending on how the transaction goes or doesn't go. I wouldn't do that if I was you. If you're gonna do a contract, you need to have a deposit. Like I said, it's very rare, but I've seen it happen.
It does. So, oh, go ahead, you have to say something real quick?
I just wanted to back up to when you're talking about the principles of the business and it not always being on something in the article.
Sure.
What was your way to confirm? the
Well,
principles?
if it was like an LLC, then it should have an operating agreement,
Right.
which would list the members of the company. It may be its corporation bylaws of the company. That way, that's the foremost way to figure that out.
A lot of times you'll see.
Tax return and K-1.
Yeah, it's K1s, right, they'll have the percentages. A lot of times you'll see a husband and wife, but maybe they don't even know that the wife even has shares. You know, you see that a lot, and all of a sudden, now she's a shareholder, and she got, right, you know, they don't know. So yes, the tax returns will tell you who's gonna get K1. But you have to really engage your client to find out.
Okay, so we're going to do some more questions at the very end. We'll do some free-for-all, but we're going to try and knock these things out. So here's another question. Make the deal happen, so you start getting creative in terms of what you add to the asset purchase agreement, tweak things around. At what point are we practicing law or writing, and at what point are we safe? Can you give us a guideline or insight regarding that?
Yeah, you know, and us three, we spoke about it before. It's hard to say. It's a very gray area. You know, I think the suggestion for me would be is don't change the contract too much, right? If you're going to do something, it's got to be very simple. I mean, the contract is written for a reason. You've had very smart attorneys help you guys write it. Stick to it. It's kind of like the FAR contract, the FAR contract. You just don't want to mess with it too much, because what happens is when you go ahead and start writing stuff in those provisions, you know, those other provisions at the end of the contract, a lot of times you create ambiguities within the contract. I mean, the contract, there's a lot in it. And when you start rewriting those contracts, there's going to be ambiguities, and a lot of times, us as closing agents, we have to go ahead and try to maneuver around them, fix them, put addendums, amendments, and try to clean them up, because a lot of those things don't make sense because they're conflicting with the body of the contract. And so that makes things a little tricky for us.
Yeah, just to add to what Jojo was just saying, make it, if you're going to add to it, make it clear and concise. I've seen people add things with a lot of what they think is legal verbiage to make it look fancy or whatever it may be. If you're going to add terms, just keep it real simple. We don't, as Joe said, no ambiguity. Make it clear and defined. That will help us, but that also will reduce your client pointing a finger back at you if something goes wrong based on what you put into the contract.
I think the rule of thumb would be if it's going to change a material clause in the contract, you know, if it's dealing with numbered items, like what items are going to be furnished from the seller in due diligence, that's not a legal term. What items, you know, modifying or excluding out things from non-compete, like you have, you know, multiple property, you know, multiple business owner, they're going to sign a non-compete, you fill in the blank on the non-compete, but they want another location that might marginally be infringing, and disclose that. Just, you know, disclosures, things that aren't, they're like business terms, not so much legal terms that are going to modify a right or a duty under the contract. I think that's pretty much rule of thumb. That way they'll keep you clear. And then, you know, a lot of times, whoever you're working with, I know, you know, I work tightly, you know, pretty closely with a lot of the brokers that I work with. If there's a question, they usually run it by me. You know, if you call whoever you're working with, and most of the time we're pretty available. If it gets we review the language, it kind of buffers and protects you guys that you had it reviewed by an attorney, so it wasn't you writing it. It was kind of falls back on us. So that, you know, that would help as well.
Good. So sometimes we get letters of intent, and other times people do the contract. Let me talk a little bit about the BBF contract for a minute too. I've seen rarely, but it's happened, people get really clever and they translate PDF into Word and start changing the stuff inside there. We're a team and a community. If you're using a BBF contract, you don't change any of that stuff that's in there. We've paid attorneys a lot of money. This gets reviewed on a review committee, on a Joe's group, every couple of years we're going through these things. We spend a lot of time, and so everybody's expecting this to be as it is out there. But can we require people use the BBF contract or not? Why don't you work the other way?
That would be something from, within the BBF, like MLS, the brokers in MLS have to, use the MLS agreements.
But can we make the buyer and seller?
No.
Right. They can bring anything they want, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a legal requirement to have one contract as opposed to the other, but if I don't think a broker should change the contract, but, just start materially rewriting the contract. That would certainly be practicing law. And yeah, I don't think you could require certain parties to go ahead and use the contracts, because you can't stop them from getting their own attorneys and using their own contracts anyway, right?
Does anybody here have like deals where they're trying to say, let me write an LOI for a business you think is less than substantially requiring an LOI? I mean, I'm seeing that more and more, but like trying to shut it down as much as possible. And the beauty of it, I mean, it's referred to section 10.5 that the buyer has to have complete total satisfaction. There's a lot of outs designed in this thing. It's made to be fair, and you all know that, but like I said, I've seen a couple times where people translated the thing and then changed the data, and it's very confusing for everyone. So I'm sure you won't do it out there. One of the main things when we thought about this as a group to bring in, we really want to say, how do we mitigate ourselves? How do we sort of said, hey, what we've done wrong, and how we can get better. But how do we really, what are some things that brokers can do, maybe you've heard of them, that keep them from getting out of trouble, or some things that are examples you could share that have gotten them into trouble? What we can commit to and ideas on that.
I think that leads back to what we were talking about regarding the unlicensed practice, giving advice probably when they shouldn't be giving advice, especially on the legal side, or whether it be on the accounting side, if they don't have the requisite knowledge to do so. Again, making changes to the contract, adding in language that there shouldn't be, or putting an ambiguous language in there that can get them into trouble, or have the finger pointed back at them. Those are common things where they've told their client one thing which is not necessarily true, the client finding out that it's not right, and then the client coming back at them, and this, that, the other. So, just staying foul of the law, essentially. Know what you're good at, deal with that, let the professionals give the advice.
Yeah, I also, and I think this happens with attorneys a lot too, I think you really have to be engaged with your client. I think most of the time, all the years I've been sitting in closings, it's when the client sits at the closing and says, I haven't heard from my broker in so long, and this SOB, and that, this, and that, and this. That's when you're going to really run afoul of what you're doing as a professional. So I would say the importance, and this goes with our profession too, because it's one of the biggest things that you see that the Florida bar cracks down on, is client engagement and communication. So be engaged with your clients, and you'll be surprised how much stuff you can avoid with good communication. I think that's important.
Some things that I think, practical things you can do up front is, again, when you're getting listings, get as much information on the business that you can. I don't know what you typically are requesting from, when you're getting the listing agreement, you're starting to gather the financial background information on what you're going to be posting. Ask the seller, what are you willing to give in due diligence disclosures? What are you willing to give? I think one of the questions you had on the sheet was, should the liabilities be included in the asset list? I don't think it should, but I think it's more appropriate to ask what information are you willing to give from the seller standpoint, who you're being engaged by, what information is going to be available in due diligence, and get copies of that stuff, so you have a complete package, and it's streamlined for when you're dealing and contacted by a buyer's agent, and you have a complete package. And then, you know, that can easily dovetail into what is going to be delivered as part of the due diligence disclosures that are going to be delivered by the sellers. You just attach that sheet, it's there, you know, it's complete, there's no question, and there's no question in due diligence that they want furnished something that the buyers might have requested. Then they have to specifically make that request in writing. Again, it dovetails into the due diligence. It's not something that is going to frustrate you getting to closing without a buyer raising the issue that, you know, they didn't receive something in due diligence and they want to push their timelines back in terms of being able to get out of a contract.
One thing I was gonna add is educate yourselves regarding a lot of the forms that you guys use, a lot of what happens in closing. The amount of times I have brokers in my office that don't know what any of the closing documents are, what they mean, what's happening. And their client is looking at them. Obviously, we're closing it, we can explain it, but at least understand what some of the documents are that are being signed at closing. It helps you look better with your clients. At least you learn, you understand the process of what's happening. That's a big one for me, where I have to educate the broker that's in my office and their client regarding what we're doing at closing.
All right, we're going through, and some of these are overlapping, but I know you've all taken notes in order here. But I guess there was a question, this is about exhibits, so I'll go ahead and ask you, do you think that we should include the exhibits of the seller liability? I think you sort of touched on that already. You feel like you've covered that pretty good, and I know you all have notes, so I'm just trying to respect that, so we'll skip on to that. Let's see, you know, this is again about exhibits, so that must have been a big factor on there. You know, if somebody asks here, you know, on non-compete terms, what are there certain guidelines? Can you ask for 1,000,000 years and the whole planet Earth? Does it depend on business? And we write these things up and we're trying to make everybody happy because we want to make them happy and make it close. But can you give us some guidance on non-compete?
Well, under the statute, I believe so the statute pretty much talks about reasonableness, right? As long as it's reasonable in time and scope, and it has a business interest that's talked about, right? So, but what is reasonableness? Well, that's pretty subjective, right? And here we are, we're attorneys, right? It's all in the gray, right? Well, what does that mean? Well, the statute itself doesn't really get into much reasonableness except for the time factor. They will kind of give you a guideline of what is what the courts may consider as reasonable. And when you talk about asset sales and stock deals and things like that to find a seller, I believe it's 3 to 7 years is the reasonable time frame that they give. So if you give me a contract that says a 20-year time period, I'm going to pretty much tell you, well, I don't know if that's really enforceable, because the courts will look at it and say, well, that's not reasonable. Now, the courts do have the ability to go ahead and make it reasonable. You know, that's part of what they do. But to enforce it is very complex, expensive. But that's you're probably better off knowing that. So when your client says, I want a 15-year non-compete, the first thing you can say, well, I don't think that's going to be enforceable under the statute, and it's not. So.
Well, the statute's different based on employment. So going
Yeah.
back to where we started, finding out who's going to be signing the non-compete, if it's an officer who's not a shareholder, their time limit is different from an owner. So there's presumptive time periods that starts at 1.5 years actually for employment. So and for sale it's 5 years, presumptively reasonable time period. But again, it all really in your disclosures when you can protect. There's trade secrets that are defined in the statute that says, basically client lists, customers, proprietary business information, processes. Those are proprietary trade secrets that are legitimate business interests that you can protect. The problem is over what geographic area. So usually the courts will probably, in the cases that I've litigated, they'll fall back on where's the region, where's the territory that you're doing work with. But I've got contracts. I mean, I've discussed with a bunch of the brokers that are in the room. you get a flip seller that says, I'm never getting back into the business, put it 50 years, 1,000 miles, I'm never gonna open a restaurant up again. You know, gosh darn, you know, next week they found a great opportunity 2 miles up the road, and all of a sudden they're saying it's not enforceable. So don't get yourselves in the middle of that, you know, make it reasonable. I usually try and go through that, and when I'll honor what is written in the contract. There's language that you can put in the contract that I think that will help, that would say that the parties stipulate that that is a reasonable duration and geographic area. And I think that might protect the parties. Now that way, when it's stipulated to by the parties, now I don't think I think it would still be probably come up in a trial, but if they've stipulated, it gives the seller a little bit more recourse in being able to enforce it, because the parties are agreeing that that's reasonable up front.
What about on the other part of it, the mileage, when you say 5 miles and they go 5 miles and 2 inches? Is that?
Well, the other problem that I've had two like that. I had one that was 4.9 miles, they opened up a restaurant. All right, and they said, well, I drove it and it was 6 miles. But it's, you know, radial miles, so it's as the crow flies. So the court actually enforced 4.9 miles, and they actually enforced that 5-mile non-compete against the guy that opened up another restaurant. The other problem is, you know, speaking of reasonableness, if you got a convenience store and you've got, you know, a convenience store on every block in the county, you know, to say that you want a 10-mile non-compete, as opposed to if you have a, you know, a specialty restaurant or a specialty store that is, you know, they're a destination location, the region that it's going to be deemed more reasonable is going to be interpreted by the court if it becomes an issue in a contest, in a non-compete. So
Basically, what we're saying is it's a case-by-case basis.
It's very subjective.
There's no right or wrong.
Could I add to that? When you say 5 miles, I've had an attorney say, it's not just really the 5 miles. You can't go 5.1 and dip your fingers back into the trade area within that radius. Your views?
I've dealt with that on like pizzerias, restaurants that are advertising back into the zone. I have language in my non-compete that covers that says they won't solicit from that area. So again, I look at the type of business. If it's a retail location, that they're not extending like a delivery zone, I try and get clarification from the parties so that they understand that is it only the storefront that's restricted, or is it soliciting from within the zone?
Trade area.
Correct.
Same thing with employees, non-solicitation of current employees. They set it up, well, you know, I'm gonna fire this guy. Can he be rehired by the seller?
Who fired him?
Who fired him? The buyer?
There's no more legitimate business interest.
No,
Nobody else.
Can't enforce it.
They won't. Florida's a right to work state, so they won't enforce that. You can't solicit them, but if the employee solicits you, I've had that issue arise.
Yeah.
The courts won't enforce that, especially if they were terminated by the prior employer, by the buyer.
so you'd literally have to have the employee sign a non-compete. I can't be hired by him again.
Yeah.
Which we're
Yeah.
not gonna be able to do.
Yeah.
But it's a solicitation issue, you know, and it's come up. Who, did that person solicit employment from the former employer? Or did the employer reach out and try and hire them away?
Okay, go ahead. What you got?
Question, going back to leases, a lot of times these big management companies that manage shopping centers, different types of properties, when you're selling the business in that particular shopping center, you should reach out to the landlord or that management company, because a lot of them have non-refundable fees of up to $3,500 that the buyer's got to pay in order to get approved for the lease. So sometimes that can kill a deal when a buyer finds that out on the blind. I usually tell them up front.
Let's keep
Before they
rates
even
more
sign the
out.
listing agreement.
Yeah. Yeah,
keep bricks more out.
yeah, landlords make things difficult, I'm gonna be honest, right?
I call the landlord.
Yeah, you have to, for you guys, you need to get that lease right away and take a look at it. Because the lease is gonna tell you what it is. Sometimes they do have those provisions, especially those big management companies. Man, they're tough to deal with. And so they'll have a provision there, say, okay, you wanna talk an assignment? Give me $3,500 and we can talk assignment. Maybe you get it, maybe you don't. Right, and who's gonna pay the fee? So,
But the buyer's gonna be more comfortable if he knows that before.
yes, that's
he
right,
signs.
that's right. You know, it's a lot of, from your side, even from our side, you know, it's a matter of managing expectations for your client, is really what it is. I mean, if you're in communication with them and you're gonna tell them, hey, look, this could happen, it's not gonna be a surprise, it's gonna go a lot easier for them.
Yeah, but the lease is probably the first thing you want to tackle
Yeah.
when you're getting into this type of thing, when you know the business has a lease.
And that goes back to what George was saying about the timeframes. We're gonna be honest, a lease assignment's not gonna come in 2 weeks. It's just not. So when everybody says, oh, this is a cash deal, we'll close next week, and it's not, you're not. You know, and don't, managing expectations, don't tell your client it's gonna happen like that, because it's not, because it's kinda out of your hands. You know, they gotta get
Easy deal.
approved. Yeah, it's like, and then you have to go do extensions, and then all of a sudden, then everybody's not happy with it, you know. So if you manage those expectations, it's gonna help you a lot, especially when it comes to the lease, because let's be honest, a lot of people, when they buy a business, they don't hire an attorney to look at their lease. And I can tell you, when you get a lease from a landlord, especially a big management company, it's not good for you, right? It's good for them. And so if you don't have somebody looking at when you go into this lease agreement up front, usually then 5 years later you want to sell a business, man, it's going to be hard, because there's going to be provisions in that lease that it's going to make it difficult. And so if you don't know that right up front, your clients are going to go ahead and look at you and be like, well, why is this so hard? Why is this so difficult? And the reason is because that's the way the lease was written. Nobody looked at it before.
I think that leads right into one of the other questions regarding the assignment issue.
Go ahead and
Yeah.
talk about
The unreasonable
this
assignment
item.
issue. A lot of these leases that you won't know is it's saying that it's in landlord's sole discretion
Oh, you
to
don't?
assign the lease, and nothing to do with reasonable or anything like that, totally sole discretion. And you have no option there.
Well, they all have assignment fees, and they say it's what my lawyer charges.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. But that's important, when we're attorneys, and over the years, a client would come to me and say, hey, can you help me look at this lease? I think I'm gonna go ahead and rent this space. Okay. Right? And the first thing you look at is you look at the assignment provision and you say, well, at least right now, the landlord says that it's assignable at their sole and absolute discretion. Well, guess what? Then you're done. You're screwed. Because the landlord doesn't really need a reasonable reason to go ahead and say no, or yes, or maybe they want more money, or maybe they want a piece of that, who knows? So those are the types of things, if you're gonna coach a potential client that's looking for a place, go get an attorney, because that's the stuff. And landlords will give you a reasonable discretion, but at least then you have an argument to go ahead and say, hey, this is not reasonable, guys.
And don't forget to tell your seller when he's transferring the lease that he's not off the hook.
Oh, well, that's another thing. If you hire an attorney to look at your lease, right? First thing you look at, besides the assignment provision, is the guarantees, right? Because you're trying to minimize your client's exposure, right? And when they're on that personal guarantee, landlords, they're on the personal guarantee forever. The landlords don't let you out. So what you have to do in order to go ahead, you have to negotiate that right before you sign the lease. You have to say now they have rolling guarantees, and they have all sorts of things that if you're good and you're attorney, you can work through some of these things and try to limit that guarantee. But what ends up happening is when you assign the lease, finally the landlord capitulates and they assign the lease, but they don't release the guarantors, right? And then the option, the new buyer, exercises the option, and then they default on the lease, and then the landlord sends the default letter to the old seller. And the old seller comes and says, hey, why am I getting this? I sold that business 4 years ago. Well, did you get a release from your guarantee? No? Okay. Well, so you gotta know, and that's part of the education stuff. And we're saying you gotta kind of know a little bit about the stuff, not to give legal advice or anything, but even to the fact that says, hey, you need somebody to look at this lease. And so you know what you're getting yourself into and what you're trying to get yourself out of, right? So.
And even when you have the commercial, commercial reasonableness standard applied to an assignment, most of the leases, most of the landlords don't put bright line rules and bright line criteria.
What's going to be reasonable?
Again, if you engage with your, prior to getting your listing agreement, just, see what those obstacles are going to be. Ask for, like Joe was saying, ask for the lease to get a handle on it. Ask, how's the relationship between the, you as a business owner and the landlord, and open up that conversation, because the last thing you're going to want to do is spend money marketing, running around a business, and then again, you get a contract that, you're going to get into a war with the landlord on assignment, or they're just not going to honor an assignment, and,
Or the timeframes are not going to work. Right? The
buyer's not qualified.
Yeah, the buyer's not qualified. The timeframes, some of these management companies, they're not in a hurry to get back to you. It's odd to me. But these big management companies, they could care less if their place is empty or not. They don't, hey, well, this is what it is. Sign it or we'll keep it empty. But I've seen over the years, right, Brian? How many deals just go bad because we just can't work with the landlord? The landlord just belligerent.
Yeah. No, tons of them. We just had one, and the landlord just said, "Hey, I'm raising the rent another $20,000 on the flower shop." And the guy said, "I'm paying 3 times rent," so he says, "I'll buy this, but you got to take $60,000 off your price." Deal or no deal, I'm walking out. By the way, the landlord says he's giving me a deal. He's going to raise it $40,000 if I don't sign up now for the next guy to come through. Landlords are merciless sometimes. Yeah. They're big time deal killers, and that trick, you got, the same boat I'm in. I mean, some guys don't want to talk to the landlord until we get close to it. I always recommend you sort of feel them out a little bit.
Yeah, thinking that maybe you get some leverage on the landlord waiting to the end. I don't know if that's a good strategy.
It's a tough one. And Publix, I've done 3 Publixes in the last year, and they were all 12 weeks. It's written in the contract. 12 weeks, and they were almost to the T. 12 weeks. Hey, can you do it earlier? No, they don't even answer the phone. See you in 12 weeks. But we all have that same problem, but it's there out there. So we're doing good.
We're going to go for a few more minutes, and then I'm going to open the floor for a couple minutes after that. There's a couple documents at the end of our asset purchase agreement, the seller assurance and the buyer's assurance. Can you guys talk about what those things are doing? We added those about 2 or 3 years back. Can you talk a little bit about the value of those and what those are for?
Well, not too much, because you probably can talk a little bit more detailed than we can, obviously, because we do mostly asset sales. I think George might do some stock transactions. I don't really do. If it turns into a stock deal, I don't, it's a different transaction for me, and I don't really mess with them. But they have to do with you guys as brokers getting your commission on the stock deal, right? And unless you guys want to talk.
No, Brian was talking to us right before this about
if you want to get an update about how the new regs.
And you probably got the letters, at one point in time, technically, if you sold a $20,000 pizza shop with $10,000 down, you were afoul of SEC, they could care less. But, when you got to the bigger and bigger deals, the lawyers were doing it. We got a no action letter. We've just gotten stuff through the House of Representatives and the Senate. I think an email's going out to everybody explaining some of the details of it. But there's certainly some attorneys that are, willing to try and get your commission. So, I just have one of the brokers from one of the big franchises asked me, hey, can I get a copy of all that documentation? We sent it over to them and said, here you go to your, there you are. Okay, right? So you went through it.
That's right.
Now I see you face to face, man.
Yes.
So how'd it go? Talk about it.
It hasn't closed yet. There was a lot of resistance from the seller to pay that commission because the BBF listing agreement doesn't explicitly state that in the tail after the close. The sale of stock is the sale of the company. You might consider changing that, but we were going back and forth. We still haven't closed it, we're hoping we get the full commission, or the minimum compensation.
Yeah, so you're going to get to work for free, huh? We do that plenty as it is, so. there are people out there and they think they're being clever, and we deliver, you all, everybody knows it, you know, we work really hard for what we do out there. And, we deserve to get rewarded, and we have a lot of stuff in place. We've had the BIEF, and that organization, I've contributed thousands of dollars to it. A lot of it, who can contribute, we've sent good people up, and still, you know, it's a valuable thing to protect your commissions and your jobs and stuff like that, so we can help other people sell their businesses. Because if you look at the stats out there, you know this, type in why businesses don't sell, and you're gonna see 70%, 80%, there's a thing in Wall Street Journal, 90% of businesses don't sell. You really add value to the people's lives. Don't let anybody ever sell you short on that stuff. I swear to God. We know that, but believe in it. Don't let people knock you down or try and get your commission or whatever it is out there. And again, we're a resource in community. I don't know the answers. Joe doesn't know every answer, but in our community, if you say, I'm trying to find a solution, somewhere in this group we got it, or we know somebody who does have the answer to helping you out to get to do the right thing if we're following the law and doing things properly. So I got a bunch more questions out here, and I don't want to abuse the time. I said I'd run till 45 minutes, and we're a few minutes away from that, and I want to open the floor. Would it be okay if we just open the floor for a minute or two and let some people ask any burning legal questions that you might have? Keep it kind of short, and we maybe do 3 or 4. Anybody got anything at all? Pete and then Greg.
So with those,
those last 2 pages of the contract that we're talking about now that the laws have changed with Mike Erdl and all that, do we still need those 2 pages then completed?
I think you should do it. Is there any harm in doing it?
Yeah, I don't see them. I don't see why.
And is it only if it's seller financing involved? Do we not need it if it's no seller financing?
Well, I think it has more to do with it being,
I think it has more to do with being a stock issue than a seller's fund. You mean like a seller's note? Yeah, that's all covered in the contract. Yeah.
So keep it in there for now.
I would keep it in there. It doesn't take away at all. Okay. Well, Greg, we come to you, but he's closer, so hey, you go further down the line.
You're talking about the buyer and seller assurances. Yeah. And there's a new version of that, because one of the requirements to get a commission for a stock sale is that the buyer has to have some kind of an active management of the company that's being purchased, and the new version of the buyer and seller assurances says that the buyer is an active manager of the company. So you actually do have to put that in. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Greg.
Never needed a microphone my entire life. Tell me to shut up. Going back to the BBF contract, this is something that's always puzzled me too. If somebody went in, changed it, and sent it to me, if I receive an offer from another broker on a listing, and it comes on that form and it says BBF, is there any sort of implied warranty that there has been no changes to that? Because my concern is always that somebody's going to put in there $10 million. I'm never going to see it.
Yeah. Well, it should be more like a form contract. It shouldn't really be changed. And I'm sure you guys, one, it's copyrighted, as I remember seeing copyrighted.
That's kind of my question. If I get that form, am I in a legal position to assume nothing's been changed?
Well,
I'm gonna take that.
I don't know.
That's a lawyer no, right?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I guess, it would be a little unprofessional for one of your colleagues to go ahead and change the standard BBF contract and not tell you. I mean, unfortunately, attorneys, you see that hopefully not too often, right? That's why we redline things and we notate things and say, okay, this has changed, that's changed, this has changed, that's changed, and, because there's a professional courtesy amongst.
Well, I've seen those contracts change, though. They have, when I've seen the contracts change, it usually generates the
change. Yeah. But I don't know if that would happen in the BBF.
I've never seen a contract, but I've seen other BBF forms that have come to me. I think my response was, Brian, what the? Where somebody definitely took this form, pulled it out of a PDF, modified it in Word, put it back into a PDF, then I lose all, I can't see the changes.
Yeah, you wouldn't see change. I've seen that. I haven't seen it with a BBF. I have seen it on the real estate side with FAR contracts and CRISP contracts. I've seen that happen. Where it's been sent over, clients thought it was something, and thankfully, the realtor on the seller side caught it before he got his
Yeah,
client to
you're
sign it.
probably smart to look through as much as you can to make sure. Now, I can tell you as an organization, the board of realtors and stuff, they take that serious. You know, they don't mess around with you changing their contracts, and if you're not party, you're not allowed to use those contracts.
Let's see what President, were you gonna say something, Joe?
Yes.
I got something to say, but you'll say it.
Yeah, so as far as the quotes that you can get off of the system, if it comes off the system printed, it's not editable. So if somebody's taking that and making a copy of it and editing it, they're in violation of the BPF bylaws and they can get kicked out for that. So you can report them to us and we'll make sure that'll happen. Most of those documents that come through the system are specifically designed that way. Can't tell you how many times people ask me, can I get a Word copy of this? Absolutely not.
No.
I have Word copies, but we do not give them out. And they only have to come through the system. No matter who you ask, they can't have a non-PDF version. So if they're editing it and they're playing that game with you, they're selling themselves up to a legal can of worms.
Yeah, somebody's gonna really have to sit there and read
That even goes back to the unlicensed practice thing. If they're changing the actual form, because you're allowed to add in your basic terms and conditions into
You're
the
not even
automated
supposed to change the head with your name on it.
stuff.
Just
But if
be
they're
there, just leave the darn thing
modifying
alone,
the
fill in the
legal
blanks.
text of the contract, then they're foul of the Florida bar rules as well, and they'll come down. Yeah.
Jeff?
Yeah, I've actually had the same problem with, work with other firms where they go in, they take a BPF contract and take out all kinds of clauses, whatever, and, you know, and then on top it says standard asset purchase agreement. So it's not really standard. That's really misrepresented, and they've changed it. And I missed it on one deal, and because of it, you know, had to follow the contract, there were clauses removed out of it. And this is actually done by one of the major franchises in the industry. And I'm not going to say their name, but they're probably representatives in this room. But multi-states, they're using a edited BBF contract with clauses removed and taken out of it.
Why wouldn't you say their names so we're all?
No, I don't want to do that. But
We'll say that,
So that's a big issue when somebody changes it, and then, you know, you see a lot of asset purchase agreements come through, it always says standard. Well, standard to who? What does that actually mean, standard to you attorneys? You know what I mean?
That doesn't make it.
No such thing.
That's why it's important to read the contract.
Yeah.
And then just go on the heading of what you're used to.
And one other point on the changes for what Greg was saying, I think it's good advice. Everybody has 5 days to go see an attorney. And just because a closing attorney, you all know that, but remind your clients because they don't know it, closing attorneys are not representing the left or the right of the party deals out there. And it says 5 days. If they don't, shame on them. They ought to go review with the attorney. How many people have saved $2,000 or $1,500 or $5,000 and wholly regretted it for hundreds of thousands of dollars later? Tell your people, hey, run this by your accountant or your attorney, whatever, get them involved. I tell them all the time, I write it all the time, and I'm trying to keep my butt out of the slaying and trouble too. Tell them it's there. If they've ignored that, it's written, it's told, it's all that stuff, that's on them, not on you, all right? Do we have any other questions? If not, we're gonna wrap this up because these guys have given their time, and I appreciate you guys. These are great coordinators, we're all around. Okay, from here on out, we can network amongst ourselves.